Welcome to The Deep Dive, the show where we take your chosen sources and really dig into them to pull out the key insights.
Yeah, it's all about giving you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed, sifting through it all for you.
And today we're tackling a book with a title that, well, it really grabs you. Monsters and Magical Sticks. There's no such thing as hypnosis.
Right, by Stephen Heller, Terry Lee Steele, and Yasser Adnan.
It's quite a claim, isn't it? Especially from Stephen Heller, who founded the Heller Institute and has been, deep in clinical hypnosis since '69, known for Ericksonian stuff.
Absolutely. He and his co-authors, Terry Lee Steele and Yasser Adnan, they're basically setting out to really shake up how we understand hypnosis.
Yeah, the book says it wants to explain how it really works, debunk myths, look at links to things like NLP, and it even claims it can really change your life.
A huge promise.
Yeah.
And, when you look at some other titles linked to them, Energized Hypnosis, sure, but also The Psychopath's Bible, Secrets of Western Tantra, even Urban Voodoo, you kind of get the feeling their angle might be a little unconventional.
Definitely unconventional. Okay, so let's get into this core idea then. Our mission here is to explore why they argue there's no such thing as hypnosis in, the way we usually think about it. And what is it instead? Where do we even start with that?
Well, a really good starting point is actually the foreword by Joyce Mills and Richard Crowley. They bring in this metaphor, the weaver of fabrics.
The weaver. Okay, tell me about that.
So picture the weaver as like a therapist or guide who helps someone take all the threads, the yarns of their life, their experiences, and weave them into their own unique tapestry. The really key thing here is the weaver isn't giving them new yarn. They're helping the person use what they already have.
Okay. So working with what's already inside you to make something new, like a new pattern or understanding?
Exactly that. The tapestry is that new understanding, new ways of thinking, new behaviors. The weaver helps you see choices you didn't see before, helps you break habits. It's about turning what might have seemed like a limitation into a resource.
That's a really useful image. Inner resources, potential.
Okay, so how does the book itself then jump into this idea that hypnosis, isn't real?
The intro hits you right away with an Aleister Crowley quote, "Nothing is, nothing becomes, nothing is not." Sets a kind of philosophical tone, questioning fixed reality.
Whoa, okay, deep start.
It is. And then one of the authors shares this story about their early experiences, things like guided meditation or astral projection later on. They realized these felt similar to what others called mild hypnosis.
So the label kept changing, but the feeling or the effect was kind of the same.
Yeah, that's the point. There wasn't one clear definition. These different things seem to tap into something unusual in the mind, even with different names. It highlights the ambiguity around the term hypnosis.
It seems like a very broad umbrella term then.
Exactly. And the book looks at situations where hypnosis-like principles are working, even when people flat out reject the word hypnosis, like Mrs. Eddy in Christian Science.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading that bit. They denounce hypnosis, but the book argues they kind of use similar mechanisms anyway, focusing on belief, suggestion. It's what the authors call a strange loop, rejecting the name, but using the core ideas. Suggests the power isn't in the word hypnosis, but in belief and suggestion themselves.
Right, the process underneath is what matters. Then they bring up that really stark example, the Irish language suppression in schools with the Basque-core.
Yeah, that stick used to punish kids for speaking Irish. Horrible. But they frame it as a kind of cultural brainwashing or conditioning.
Brainwashing, that's strong.
It is, but think about it. By constantly punishing the language, they were trying to stamp out a whole way of thinking, a whole culture. Nobody called that hypnosis. But the effect on people's minds and behavior was profound, right? It shows how powerful consistent messages, and even negative ones, can be in shaping reality.
So it's shaping understanding through constant reinforcement, even negatively. And it's outside what we'd normally think of as hypnosis.
Totally. And they draw a line from that to how quickly whole societies change their views on, say, Germany or Japan or Russia around World War II. Allies become enemies. Enemies become allies. Shows how fast and deep our collective beliefs can shift. Again, it points to how malleable belief is, way beyond just formal hypnosis.
And this leads right into the power of belief, our internal reality. They use that Timothy Leary quote, "You can be anything you want to be this time around."
Yeah, in the context of, language wiping out culture or allergies supposedly vanishing through belief.
Yeah.
The point is our inner world hugely impacts our outer experience.
Yeah.
The book's core idea starts coming into focus. We're constantly hypnotizing ourselves and each other.
How so?
Through our beliefs, our expectations, how we interact, often totally unconsciously.
Okay. Then there's that quick story about Nasruddin, drying flour on a clothesline. Seems a bit random.
It does feel a bit like, where did that come from? But it's a metaphor. Nasruddin's silly reason for not lending flour shows that things seem possible or impossible based on your intention or perspective, even if it defies logic.
So it's about how our mindset frames what we think can happen.
Exactly. Which is key to how suggestion works by shifting perspective. And that leads into the section on illusions and assumptions. They use the Las Vegas blackjack player example.
Right. The guy with all the chips turns out to be the pizza king, not a gambling whiz.
Yeah. And the young couple sees the chips, assumes he's an expert, copies him, loses money, and then blames themselves. The illusion, the assumption based on appearances, led them astray.
A good reminder not to just trust appearances, especially about experts.
Definitely. And it connects to the kids copying adults, assuming they know everything just because they drive cars or use big words. The kids get frustrated because they can't see past that surface assumption.
Which ties into the rosebush metaphor, Judy and Jim.
Yes, that's a great one. 2 rose bushes, totally different environments. Judy thrives with good soil, good care. Jim struggles in bad soil with caretakers who think they're helping but aren't.
And even though Jim survives, he sees Judy thriving and internalizes this idea that he's the problem, like I'm defective.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Even when Jim is moved to the good environment, next to Judy, that belief sticks. He still struggles because he's convinced he's no good. His past environment created this internal belief that overrides his current reality.
Wow. So the internal belief becomes stronger than the actual external situation.
That's the takeaway. It's like a self-fulfilling thing. If you deeply believe you're flawed, you'll act that way, find evidence for it, even if things around you improve. Then they discuss the monkey business experiment.
Oh, the one with the electrified squares. That sounded pretty intense.
It is. It shows how negative conditioning can lead to, well, what looks like totally irrational behavior. The monkey gets super anxious, then seems almost manic-depressive, and eventually self-destructs when all the squares become dangerous.
It basically breaks down.
But, and this is crucial, when they move the monkey to a safe, nurturing place, it calms down pretty quickly. Within weeks, it's acting just like the monkeys who never went through the trauma. It adapts. It doesn't cling to the past trauma indefinitely.
Unlike Jim the Rosebush, maybe. Is that the contrast they're drawing?
That seems to be the implication. That humans, unlike the monkey perhaps, often do hold on to past hurts and keep expecting bad things, even when their situation changes. We're not always so quick to adapt.
Okay, so these stories build this picture. Our beliefs, assumptions, past conditioning, they shape our reality in big ways, often unconsciously. How does that lead to hypnotic transactions in everyday life?
Right, this is where they connect the dots to our interactions. Take a simple example. A patient tells a therapist, "My date really hurt me."
And the therapist hears hurt and immediately fills in the blanks based on their own experiences of being hurt.
Exactly. They unconsciously hallucinate the details, assuming their version of hurt matches the patient's. That simple exchange, the authors say, is close to a hypnotic transaction. These subtle, unconscious ways our beliefs shape how we interact and understand each other.
So even just talking, we're kind of nudging each other's reality based on our own internal stuff. And in therapy, that must be even more amplified.
For sure. They even tell a story about a therapist feeling totally drained and anxious after seeing one patient. Watching a video back, they realized the patient was basically hypnotizing the therapist with their reality, their way of being. Influence goes both ways.
That's a really important point. It's not just one person doing hypnosis to another. Okay, what about the woman who heard her husband call her a fat pig?
Oh yeah, that's a powerful one. Because he didn't say those words. But she interpreted his tone through her own lens, her past experiences, her insecurities. She filled in the blanks and reacted as if he had said it.
So her expectation and history created the meaning, not the actual words.
Precisely, and that ties directly into how they see regression. Not just something in formal hypnosis, but an everyday thing.
How so?
Well, that woman's reaction, it was like a mini regression. Her husband's tone was the trigger, a familiar sound that instantly pulled her back to an old emotional state, likely linked to feelings about her father. Ordinary things can zap us back emotionally.
Wow. Okay. And they even say learning basic things like 2 + 2 is a form of hypnotic suggestion. That seems like a stretch.
It sounds like it, but think about their logic. The teacher, the authority, repeats 2 + 2 = 4. You memorize it. You give the answer automatically when asked. It follows the structure. Suggestion, this is the answer, and post-hypnotic response 4, when triggered by the question, what's 2 plus 2?
Huh. So the automatic recall is like the post-hypnotic response.
Yeah, like the waiter suddenly remembering the order when he sees the coffee pot again. It's a provocative way to look at learning and automatic associations, blurring the lines.
And they compare the stage hypnotist's red light suggestion, making someone raise their hand, to a driver stopping at a red traffic light.
Exactly. Both are presented as conditioned responses learned through hypnotic transactions, whether formal or informal. The point is, tons of our behaviors, good and bad, are learned this way. We have all these automatic responses we don't even think about.
Makes you wonder how many of our daily actions are just running on these old programs.
Right. And the case of the young man who was afraid to do better than his father really drives this home.
Because of what his mother said years ago.
Yeah, don't you ever try to be better than your father. That phrase, lodged in his unconscious, became this huge barrier. Even though his dad was, just a retired mailman, that suggestion created this internal conflict that sabotaged him. No formal hypnosis needed for that suggestion to stick and cause problems.
It's powerful how everyday words can have such lasting impact. And anxiety, too, they see it as a triggered response.
Yeah, like the stage hypnotist making someone pull their tie when they hear a word. They compare that to the guy who panics at a party just because a woman gives him a funny look. It seems small, but that look, based on his past associations, triggers a big physical and emotional reaction. We all have our own personal triggers.
And then Svengali and Trilby, the famous hypnotist and his subject.
Well, here's the twist the authors point out. Svengali and Trilby were fictional characters.
No way, really.
Yeah. But so many people believe they were real. It just shows the power of stories and suggestion. We can be hypnotized into believing things that aren't even real. Narratives shape our beliefs profoundly.
So how does this compare to, say, neurotic responses? Is there a difference?
That's the question they raise. They draw a parallel between the sort of predictable, almost automatic responses you might see in hypnosis and the conditioned, compulsive reaction someone labeled neurotic might have to certain triggers. Are they fundamentally different mechanisms? Maybe not as much as we think.
Challenging categories. Then they talk about using metaphors in therapy, like blowing up time bombs.
Yeah, it sounds weird, right?
Yeah.
How does pretending to blow up a bomb help anxiety? But it works on a symbolic level. They argue the problem itself is often a metaphor for something deeper. So the solution can also be metaphorical, speaking the language of the unconscious.
And the rocket launch metaphor, that sounds intense.
It is. The guided missile is like the hypnotic suggestion, the guidance system. The trigger is the button that launches it. And the fuel, fear. Past suggestions, fueled by fear, can keep driving our behavior, sometimes destructively.
Like the guy afraid to succeed because of his mom's comment. The fear fueled the self-sabotage?
Exactly. Which leads to a really core idea. We don't respond to objective reality. We respond to our internal metaphors about reality. Those metaphors become our reality. Our belief systems are like inner maps.
And if the map is wrong?
You get lost. Like trying to navigate San Francisco with a San Diego map. You keep bumping into reality because your map doesn't fit. It causes pain. And in therapy, a therapist can even get hypnotized by the patient's map if they just accept the patient's story without questioning the underlying beliefs.
They need to help the patient see maybe there's a different map or the map needs updating. This idea that beliefs are like memories is also interesting.
Yeah, think about the beach example. Same beach. One person sees beauty, feels peace. Another sees crowding, feels annoyed. Why? Because their past experiences, their beliefs, their memories or metaphors about beaches are totally different. It filters everything.
It really highlights how subjective everything is. And the story about the psychiatrist wishing he had a different patient.
Yeah. It's a reminder you have to work with the person who's actually there, with their abilities, their beliefs. You can't just wish for an easier or more astute client. Meet them where they are.
Which leads to induction via belief system, right? The psychologist who insisted he couldn't be hypnotized.
Classic example. He believed arm catalepsy, his arm getting stiff and stuck, was the sign of hypnosis. So what did the therapist do? They used his belief. They guided him towards experiencing arm catalepsy. And because he defined that as hypnosis, he experienced it.
So they used his own map to guide him into the state he thought was impossible for him. Clever.
Very. It's all about utilization, tailoring the approach. And that fits right in with what they learned from Milton Erickson.
The legendary hypnotherapist.
Right. Erickson saw symptoms and complaints not just as problems, but as metaphors, stories about the real underlying issue. And therapy for him was about building metaphors of solutions, working with symbols and stories to reach the unconscious.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. They talk about communication styles, visual, kinesthetic, auditory, our conscious output systems.
Yeah, basically how we prefer to express ourselves. Some people talk about how things look, visual, some focus on how things feel, kinesthetic, and others on how things sound, auditory.
And we tend to assume everyone else uses the same system we do.
Often, yes. In the U.S., they estimate maybe 40% visual, 30% kinesthetic, 30% auditory. Think about phrases like, I see your point, versus I feel you, versus that sounds right. We can use all systems, but sometimes we get stuck, like maybe someone depressed is stuck in painful feelings, the kinesthetic system.
And the actress and producer example shows how this mismatch causes problems.
Big time. She's talking about feeling uptight, kinesthetic. He's responding with how she looks visual. They're talking past each other. She feels completely misunderstood because he's not speaking her language.
So understanding someone's preferred system is key for connection. Then they talk about unconscious input systems and eye movements.
Right. This is about how we unconsciously access information. Based on Bakan's work, the idea is that where our eyes move can give clues. Often, looking up relates to accessing visual memories, side to side for auditory, down and to the right for kinesthetic.
So you can potentially see how someone is thinking or remembering.
Potentially, yeah. And importantly, garbage in, garbage out. If the memories being accessed are distorted or negative, the output, the feeling or thought will reflect that. So observing eye movements gives clues about unconscious processing.
And the idea is to match your communication to both their conscious output and their unconscious input.
Ideally, yes. Speak visually to someone accessing visual memories. But they also say, look, don't get too rigid. Sometimes conscious and unconscious systems differ, but the person functions perfectly well. It's not automatically a sign of conflict or incongruence.
Okay. And you can figure out someone's less conscious system, their out-of-conscious one, by noticing what they don't use much in language or eye movements.
Exactly. If someone's all visual language and eye movements, maybe their auditory system is less accessible consciously. Knowing that gives you more ways to potentially connect or offer different perspectives.
Right, to tap into different ways of processing. Now, back to problems' negative beliefs, automating self-defeating patterns, habits becoming automatic.
Yeah, habits start consciously, but repetition makes them unconscious, automatic plans, as Miller, Galanter, and Pribram said. And Gazzaniga's split brain work showed how fast the brain can learn patterns, sometimes instantly. This pattern idea is central to change.
Which brings us to pattern interruption, like the doctor stomping his foot for the guy with back pain.
Perfect example. The patient is locked in his pain pattern. The doctor does something totally unexpected, stomp. It breaks the pattern, shifts the patient's focus for a second, and in that gap, his own body's resources can kick in, and the pain might actually lessen.
Just disrupting the expected sequence creates an opening, like the doctor giving weird answers to the depressed patient.
Same idea. Interrupt the loop of negative thoughts with something nonsensical or unexpected. Shake up the pattern.
Now let's talk brain hemispheres, left brain, right brain.
The classic distinction. Left brain, more verbal, logical, analytical. Right brain, more spatial, visual, creative. They reference Edwards, Ornstein, Buzan, Dixon, and the idea of 90-minute cycles where dominance shifts between hemispheres.
And the therapeutic goal is often better balance between them.
That's the argument. Helping people integrate logic and creativity. Like Maslow's self-actualized people who could move fluidly between concrete reality and more abstract or creative thought.
The case of the divorced guy, scared of women but great at tennis, illustrates this.
Beautifully. His fear was maybe more left brain, analytical worry in a new social situation. His tennis skill, that confident flow state, was likely more right brain, based on practiced physical memory.
So the goal was to get that tennis confidence feeling over into the dating situation.
Exactly. Access the right brain resource. They used hypnosis, but also specific techniques like speaking slower, lower tone, tilting the head towards the right hemisphere, all aimed at engaging that right brain more directly.
And that embedded suggestion. Fear is nothing more than forgetting your confidence.
Right. Reframing fear is simply forgetting something you already possess. And the therapist would interrupt his fear talk with positive anchors, the head tilt, a smile, maybe snapping fingers, breaking the negative pattern and linking to the positive state.
Using his tennis learning curve as a metaphor, too, how he wasn't good at first but practiced.
Yeah, showing him learning to approach women is just like learning tennis, a skill you develop. And getting that baseline data, asking him to just notice his fear, was also key. Gets him involved, observing himself.
This also relates to unconscious attraction, right? Feeling drawn to someone because of hidden links to past good feelings.
Totally. Our unconscious makes connections we're not aware of, driving attraction or repulsion sometimes. Which brings us back to the title, Monsters and Magical Sticks.
The story of the little boy whose baseball and football turned into monsters at night.
Right. Logic didn't work. Telling him they were just balls didn't help. What worked? A magic stick. Giving him something that engaged his imagination, his belief, his unconscious, an illogical solution for an illogical fear.
Speaking the language of the unconscious again, like the girl who thought the downstairs neighbor lived in the rug.
Yeah, kids create these amazing realities based on their limited understanding. And the snowman getting bigger and bigger in her imagination shows how fears can grow and persist in our inner world.
So the book says left brain conscious, right brain unconscious is a useful metaphor for therapy, even if it's biologically simplified.
Exactly. Use logic for conscious work, stories, and fantasy for the unconscious. They also mention Erickson's idea that the unconscious protects us, but at a crucial point. It protects based on its current knowledge, which might be outdated or not helpful now.
Which explains the bee phobia case, the woman terrified of bees.
Yes. Turns out the buzzing wasn't just about bees. It was a metaphor for her husband's constant criticism buzzing in her ear. The phobia was a symbolic message about her marriage. Address the underlying message, and the phobia can resolve.
Wow. Symptoms as metaphors. So good hypnosis isn't about magic words, but directing people to their own resources.
That's the core message. Tailor the approach. Don't just look for a script. Which leads right into utilization.
Using the problem itself as part of the solution.
You got it. Seeing the presenting issue, anxiety, resistance, compulsiveness, as a unique skill or characteristic that can be redirected. Like the woman who couldn't relax because she was uptight. The therapist starts there. Okay, show me how skilled you are at being tense, and guides her from tension into relaxation.
Or the guy who resisted hypnosis, reframing his resistance as being like an Indian scout collecting scalps.
Yeah, working with his tendency to resist. Using confusion with another client to bypass conscious blocks, using logical sounding but ultimately illogical arguments with the doctor client. It's all about utilizing what the person brings.
Okay, and then anchors. We touched on them, but they're like conditioned triggers.
Exactly. Sights, sounds, feelings, touches that automatically trigger a specific response or state. Like Pavlov's dogs. But the book jokes, maybe the dogs conditioned Pavlov to ring the bell.
Huh. And remembering something vividly can bring back the feelings it's anchoring to. So anchor collapse is about canceling out a negative anchor.
Right. You associate a negative trigger, like anxiety about a test, with a strong positive trigger, like feeling confident and relaxed. Fire them both at the same time.
How does that work?
The theory is it creates confusion in the nervous system. The brain doesn't know how to feel anxious and confident simultaneously. Often, the positive anchor seems to weaken or neutralize the negative one.
Like with the student feeling anxious. Touch one shoulder for anxiety, the other for feeling good, then touch both.
That's the basic procedure. Establish the positive anchor, establish the negative one, test them individually to make sure they work, then fire both together. Sometimes you might start with the negative if the person is already feeling bad.
Does it always work dramatically?
Responses vary. Could be subtle, could be obvious. You have to watch the person. It seems like magic, but it's based on conditioning.
Right.
And no formal hypnosis is necessarily needed. The problem itself can be seen as an anchor you're trying to change.
And they weave these techniques throughout the book, not just in one chapter, like the woman with the flying phobia.
Yeah, her visual memory of flying triggered intense physical anxiety, a negative anchor. They established positive anchors, feeling safe, calm, and then collapsed them with the fear trigger, big reduction in her fear.
And the cancer patient in pain, using his love of music and woodworking.
That was about utilizing his preferred systems, exploring the sound of his pain, auditory, linking it to positive anchors, and implicitly connecting the idea of forgetting the sound of his tools with forgetting the feeling of pain. Very subtle.
These techniques sound almost too simple sometimes.
The authors warn about that. Don't overcomplicate it or doubt it just because it seems easy. The key, they review, is pattern interruption. Humans run on patterns. Interrupt the painful ones.
And they really encourage experimenting, being unexpected.
Absolutely. Try things out. Don't be afraid to fail. Learn from it. They even suggest that if you, the reader, felt uncomfortable reading about stage hypnosis, maybe you were having a kind of hypnotic response yourself through empathy.
Makes you think. So they really want to redefine hypnosis away from stage tricks.
Definitely. Modern approaches, like Erickson's and Heller's, are about understanding and using these unconscious processes. Heller himself apparently used these methods as the sole anesthesia during a mastectomy, which is pretty incredible.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this up. The book Monsters and Magical Sticks fundamentally challenges the whole idea of hypnosis as some special state.
Right. It presents it more as a natural part of communication, conditioning, belief systems, and how we use our internal patterns. We're constantly influencing each other, hypnotizing each other in subtle ways all the time.
So understanding these ideas can help you become more aware of your own automatic patterns, the maps you use, and these hypnotic transactions happening around you.
Exactly. It can be quite empowering.
Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. If there's no such thing as hypnosis in that old-fashioned sense, what does that really tell us about the sheer power of our beliefs, the force of suggestion, and how much our internal maps shape our reality? How might thinking about that apply to challenges in your own life?
Something to consider.
Definitely. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. If you've got sources you want us to tackle, send them our way. Until next time.